This is a biomechanical analysis of running technique of a triathlete. The triathlete in the videos is Jeff Abernathy, and the presentation is by me, Janelle Nichols. So rigorous training is required in order to complete a triathlon. The running portion of a triathlon is the final leg of the competition, and some may say that this is the most important aspect of determining the overall success of the triathlete. Unfortunately, most triathletes spend the majority of their time training for the cycling event. Since the running event is the final stage of the triathlon, this is a time when the triathlete may endure the most physical and mental fatigue. This biomechanical analysis is geared toward helping triathletes improve performance by focusing on proper technique as well as improving poor mechanics. I will be presenting a biomechanical analysis of Jeff Abernathy's running technique. I feel fortunate enough to have Jeff Abernathy as a volunteer. He's completed over 20 marathons and also 20 triathlons in his life, including the Hawaii Ironman World Championship. Okay, so in order to do this analysis, we want to first know what is the goal. The goal of the triathlete is to move forward efficiently and economically in order to run for long distance. The goal of the beginner may just be to finish the triathlon, where for somebody like Jeff, who's more of an elite triathlete, his goal is going to be to improve his time. So what is the most efficient way to run? Well, running is a kinetic chain that involves a number of muscles and joints, and what happens at one location of the body could ultimately affect another location. The foot and ankle, knee, hip, pelvis, torso, and the upper body all play a role in running gait. Let's first look at the foot and ankle. Typically, a greater heel strike is associated with a slower cadence, and this also may be why the elite marathon runners tend to have more of a midfoot strike. The ankle is generally flexed at 90 degrees at foot strike and progresses to 20 degrees of dorsiflexion. This flexion helps absorb impact during the mid-stance phase of running. Each time the foot is planted on the ground during running, 3 times the body weight of the runner is absorbed by the lower extremities. Increased rigidity of the foot actually helps decrease shock distribution during running. So the best way to run is actually with foot pronation. This uses the subtalar joint, which everts the foot on impact. This will help protect against running injuries by equally distributing the impact forces throughout the foot. Also, pronation allows for flexibility in the foot and the ankle for different running surfaces. Now let's take a look at the knee. During running, the knee moves through 95 degrees of arc motion. The forces exerted on the knee are 4.7 to 6.9 times the body weight at the patellar tendon and 7 to 11.1 times body weight at the patellofemoral joint. Compared to walking, knee flexion moment is 5 times greater during running. Knee injuries tend to be the most common location for running injuries, and that makes up about 20 to 30%. Now looking at the hip, although the hip can move throughout a range of about 140 degrees, long distance runners like triathletes generally have a constraint 40 degrees of arc motion. This constraint helps stabilize the hip joint and makes it be able to take high repetitive loads. The pelvis, sacrum, and lumbar vertebrae provide stability to the extremities during running. The normal range of motion of flexion and extension during running is about 5 to 7 degrees. A slight anterior pelvic tilt will help increase stride. Pelvic tilt should be about 10 to 15 degrees. 10 degrees is normal for standing. So as running velocities increase, pelvic tilt really should not. Looking at the torso, trunk flexion during running is usually about 3 to 10 degrees, and the core muscles help stabilize the spine, pelvis, and the rest of the kinetic chain by absorbing and distributing the forces. This also helps with the breathing and the twisting motion during running. Trunk ipsilateral tilt after foot strike during running is about 5 to 20 degrees, and this is in coordination with the pelvis. And at the top of the kinetic chain, we have the upper body. So each arm movement really should counterbalance the opposite leg during the swing phase. The arms aid in balance, and they also help stabilize during running gait. So this synchronized movement of the arms and the legs help minimize twisting of the torso, the pelvis, and then helps minimize head rotation as well. So all of this, when it's minimized, it's going to in return help save energy and allow maximum stride length. Okay, so what demands are being placed on the triathlete while running? Running requires a greater range of motion of all lower limb joints than walking would, and requires greater eccentric muscle contraction. As running cadence, stride, and step length all increase, velocity and ground reaction forces also increase. Therefore, there is a greater risk for injury in the lower extremities due to the increased stress. Now let's look at the different phases of running. Here we'll look at the different phases of running. There's stance, float, swing, and then float again, depending on the speed of the runner. So in this picture up above, this is probably a sprinter, where Jeff, the long distance runner, is going to have less acceleration with the arms and then less knee flexion as he continues throughout the phase. This is going to help him conserve energy so he can run for longer distances. So beginning with the stance phase, at the start of each stance phase, the ground reaction force is applied to the runner's foot when contact is made with the ground. Each time the runner goes through the stance phase, the lower extremities must absorb the energy as the vertical downward motion comes to a stop. That's usually about 40 to 50% of the phase, depending on speed. As velocity increases in running, the stance phase percentage decreases. As running cadence, stride, and step length increase, velocity and ground reaction forces increase, which we had talked about in the previous slide. Next is the float phase. This is also called flight. This is probably going to be a lower percentage for Jeff because he's going to have less float time in the air because he wants to get down on the ground quicker to take more strides. This is going to help him for longer distances. So at this time, the knee extensors generate energy, and this helps transition the float phase into the swing phase. So the swing phase is about 30% of the phase. Increased flexion of the knee occurs here. The rectus femoris, vastus intermedius, and lateralis dissipate energy, which helps decelerate the knee joint from excessive flexion. When the quadriceps contract concentrically during the late swing phase, this will help provide extension of the knee, which is necessary for the upcoming foot strike. And so this could be another time for float. More than likely, a long distance runner like Jeff is not going to have this last phase. He's going to go right back into the stance phase over again. Now we'll look at the mechanics that are helping Jeff achieve his goal. Starting with the arm swing, specifically looking at the right arm. We'll talk about the left arm in a moment. The right arm is swinging in opposition of the left leg, and that's helping him for balance, acceleration, and it's helping to stabilize his gait. Next, we'll look at knee flexion. When his heel is striking and he's coming down into the stance phase, he has about a 20-degree angle at the knee, and this is going to help absorb the impact. Okay, so during the swing phase, maximum flexion of the knee should be between 90 and 130 degrees. Jeff says at 105 degrees, and this is going to help the rectus femoris eccentrically contract, and that's going to prevent overflexion of the knee during the early phase of swing, and the hamstrings are going to contract eccentrically during the late phase of the swing phase, and that's going to help prevent overextension. Lastly, we're going to look at the anterior pelvic tilt. This is beneficial for increasing stride length, so it's going to be more energy efficient to have the pelvic tilted more anteriorly. Even if you think about it, if it was more posteriorly tilt, the force would go down and through the front of the knee, where we want it to be more into the glutes, hamstrings, quadriceps. This is going to make a more efficient technique for running. Now we'll look at some of the mechanics that are poor that could use some improvement, starting with running gait. At mile 3, Jeff ran a longer distance and his foot strike became more of a heel strike. It's not necessarily considered poor mechanics, but as mentioned earlier, more elite athletes tend to have more of a mid-foot strike, so transitioning to a heel strike could actually slow him down. I just thought it was interesting that he started with a mid-foot strike and then went to a heel foot strike. This could be slowing him down, but maybe it was more cost efficient for him. Next, we're going to look at supination. This is one of the major issues that it seems like he's having. A little supination during foot strike and then turning into pronation would have been okay, but as you can see, his foot stays supinated throughout the entire phase. During supination, the foot is inverted, the forefoot is adducted, and the ankle is plantar flexed. This can put a lot of pressure on the tibia. Pronation actually would be preferred to evenly distribute the forces throughout the foot, since the foot tends to be the beginning of the kinetic chain during running, this is very important to correct. And we took a look at the right arm earlier and said how great the mechanics were here, but now let's look at the left arm. You can see how the elbow is flexed differently, and even more so when we look at the posterior view. In the posterior view, we can see that there's obvious tension in the left side of his body, and his shoulders elevated. It's probably affecting his torso as well, since the arm and the opposite leg are not fluently working together. Although this may seem like a little small factor, it increases energy expenditure by keeping the arm restricted compared to letting the arm swing in a motion like the right arm had. In addition, this restriction of not letting the arm swing may also affect his stride length. In a moment, I'll discuss some recommendations for improving the poor mechanics that we just noted in the previous slide. But first, why is it important to correct running biomechanics? For triathletes especially, it's important to correct these poor mechanics because triathletes spend a number of hours a week training for competition, and if the triathlete is habitually using poor biomechanics, then they're going to increase their risk for injury. Also, improving mechanics of running will help improve competition times. If the triathlete can learn to utilize proper techniques, then he'll be able to run more efficiently, thus he'll have a better overall triathlon time. How are we going to correct these poor running biomechanics? We'll discuss some useful exercises and stretches to help correct poor running mechanics. Also, practicing the proper technique prior to competition is extremely important. Here are some exercises to help improve the triathlete's running performance, starting with correcting the foot and ankle supination. Some athletes, like Jeff, with increased supination, may have an abnormal foot anatomy or musculature, like high arches, and that may require a cushioned shoe or maybe even a shoe insert, like an orthotic. If there are no deformities found, then Jeff would benefit from performing exercises that require the foot to land more evenly, like jump roping or a partial forward lunge. This way it will create a mental awareness of how it feels to land and distribute the force more equally, instead of relying mainly on the lateral side of the body and the foot. For triathletes that repetitively load the lateral side of the body during supination, the leg during running most likely creates an imbalance with the inner thigh. So Jeff may want to try some inner thigh exercises like a lateral lunge or squatting with the feet turned out, and concentrating on keeping the stability in the middle of his foot. In addition to these strengthening exercises, it's also important to stretch the calves, hamstrings, and the quadriceps to help prevent injury. And then looking to correct the left arm swing restriction, some exercises to help ease up the tension in the shoulder may be stretching the posterior deltoid, so taking the arm across the body and pulling it in toward your chest, holding that for 20 to 30 seconds, 2 to 3 times. And then strengthening the anterior deltoid will be important. Exercises like a diagonal cable pull bent over across the body would probably be beneficial, in addition to doing an inclined dumbbell lateral raise. And we can see both of those exercises here. So Jeff may not even realize all of these improper mechanics that are going on until he actually sees it videotaped. So once he's aware of these, hopefully just increasing consciousness will help improve overall form as well. So how would improving mechanics improve overall running time? First, looking at correcting the supination. When the load of the repetitive weight-bearing activities such as running is evenly dispersed throughout the foot, then the joints and muscles up the leg and the rest of the kinetic chain will also work in a balanced manner. So correcting the supination to increase pronation of the foot and ankle will help provide more vertical stability during running, thus performance will increase. Also, the lateral side of the body will be under less stress, and the risk for injury to joints like the lateral knee will also decrease. And then it will be beneficial to prevent the restricted arm swing. As discussed earlier, arm swing in opposition with the leg increases balance and lessens tension in the shoulder, torso, and possibly even the pelvis. If balance is improved and unnecessary tension is eliminated, then running economy will improve and so will performance. Also, if the posterior deltoid is more flexible and the anterior deltoid is stronger, less retraction will take place in the scapula, and then there will be less abnormal twisting in the torso, so the risk of injury will also decrease. So let's put this all together. How would this help the transition from the biking event to the running event during a triathlon? A triathlete's transition from cycling 112 miles to running 26.2 miles is a significant component of overall competition success. During long endurance exercises in a triathlon, like the running and cycling, a number of factors may influence the energy costs, like environmental conditions, the athlete's classifications, are they elite, are they trained, and the metabolic changes like fatigue. The metabolic demand and performance during long endurance events in a triathlon can be altered by biomechanical factors. Pacing strategies in cycling and running can help avoid fatigue. A higher cadence, about 90 rotations per minute or above, during cycling is associated with less pedal force. Increased pedal skill may decrease lower limb muscle stress. A higher cadence in addition to muscle synchronization may reduce aerobic demand and make the transition from cycling to running a better one. So if fatigue coming off the bike is lessened and the correct techniques as described in the presentation are utilized, triathletes like Jeff can improve their time successfully. Here is a list of references that were used throughout the presentation. Thank you for taking the time to watch my presentation. I hope you learned a great deal of information and that this helps you either become a better triathlete if that's your goal, or a better fitness coach if you train triathletes or long distance runners.